Hello and welcome to Practical Counselling Skills. My name is Dr. Fee and I'm an accredited member of the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy. I have over 20 years experience both counselling in a private practice and also supervising other counsellors. These skills that I'm going to share with you now have been developed by myself and my supervisees over this period of time and fill in some of the gaps that theoretical based practice may have. All our training initially is theoretical, and sometimes we can add to our repertoire by using additional skills in the counselling room. These skills do not replace the theoretical understanding of what's happening for the client, but may ease our access into understanding and allowing the client to understand what is going on for them. This is not a play therapy. Play therapy does not work in the same way as practical counselling skills. In the skills that we're going to share, the client leads the activity and the space is held by the counsellor. So it's essential that these skills are used by experienced counsellors who are used to dealing perhaps with complex clients and who are able to hold the space for the client as they explore their emotions through these activities. These activities do not replace the theoretical understanding of what's going on, but they do add to it and often add depth to the understanding and the ability of the client to understand what's going on for them. In this first series of practical counselling skills, we will be looking at bereavement. The first three tutorials look at the grief cycle. It's a version of the Kübler-Ross Grief Cycle, but used within the counselling room. Look at salt jars and memory books and memory boxes. All these tutorials can be found on practicalcounsellingskills.co.uk. We have plans for future tutorials looking at anxiety, self-esteem and relationships, and all of these will be able to be used by experienced counsellors to add depth to their practice within the counselling room. I look forward to working with you. First, we're going to look at the grief cycle. Now, normally I would produce this on a piece of paper with the client, but today, so you can see how I would normally work, I'm going to do it on a whiteboard. So here we have a small desktop whiteboard, and I hope this allows you to see how I would normally work. Now, what this does is it provides the client with a physical copy that validates how they're feeling and helps them see that there is a normal process to grief. There's no time scale, but there's a normal process. And what it's worth the counsellor recognising is that bereavement is not just about death, but bereavement is about loss. So it may be that the client has presented with loss of work, unexpected loss of work, a divorce, unexpected loss of a marriage and a home. It may be that they feel they have lost family who have moved away, moved up country and are no longer able to see them regularly. It may be that they have lost their health through some sort of illness and therefore they cannot continue their life in the way that they hoped. So what we start with is just looking at how life was prior to the loss. And I would draw that like this, a wiggly line, because life is never dead straightforward, and quite often we have little things that are ups and downs in life that we manage. They're part of our everyday life and we don't really give them an awful lot of attention. And then all of a sudden something happens, a bereavement happens, and it knocks us off our path. We would normally think of ourselves as just going forward in the same manner, and now because of the shock, because of the bereavement, our life has changed. Now, what happens when we first experience bereavement is often shock. Absolute stunning numbness, shock that this has happened. This is frequently followed, we'll put numbness in here, and it's very frequently followed close behind by disbelief. How can this have happened? This isn't what we thought it was going to be. This isn't how I imagine my life going forward. This is not something I planned for, and therefore there's this disbelief. Quite often there is anger as well. Now, anger is often undervalued by both the client and the counsellor, but the anger is a really motivating emotion which tries to get the client to understand why this has happened and to give them their psychological desire to not let it happen again. That's what anger does. It's a protective emotion. And so while the client is going through anger, the numbness and disbelief feed into that, so they can't get a clear picture of what's going on. Quite often this is followed by if only I'd done this, if only I'd done something else. The if onlys often lead into a guilt. I should have done something differently. I should have checked that my loved one was taking their tablets, had been for their checkups. I should have produced a piece of work on time. I should have been more attentive in my marriage, etc., etc. A lot of should haves. Overriding all of this is a sense of sadness, because loss and the ability to have not avoided it creates sadness. Some clients will actually try and bargain. There's a bargaining chip here where they say, I promise I'll never ever do this again, so it should never happen. Life will be better, life will continue as it was. And it tries to create in the client a false hope that they can revert back to the way life was. This bargaining is often intermittent. So they'll do something and they'll think, if I do this well, if I help out here, maybe bad things won't happen. One of the things that counsellors need to be particularly aware of and check with the client is their belief system. Now, if it is a loss of particularly a death, it may actually make clients question their faith and their belief system. How could their God do this to them? The person who's died was a good person, a kind person, they're good, whatever, and therefore how can this have happened? How can a good God have allowed this to happen? And counsellors need to be aware of the belief system when they start to talk to clients about how they're going to manage this bereavement, because you cannot bring in your belief system. You have to work with the client's belief system, whether it is something that you actually condone or otherwise. It is important that you work with the client's belief system. This first quadrant, clients will often have a lot of support. People will rally round, try and help, be supportive, visit, etc. And the client may also have a lot of things to do. There may be legal paperwork to do. There may be a funeral to organise. They may be looking for another job. There may be a lot of activity at this point. But then after a very short period of time, the people who have been helping return to their normal lives and are getting on with their lives. And so there is less support. And the client enters this phase here, which is really a phase of disorganisation. Their normal is no longer available to them, and they don't have a new way of being. So they feel totally disorganised. This will often have a feeling of anxiety and low mood, and the client may feel unmotivated at this time to do anything. Because what's the point? It's so awful, the loss. Now, what you must remember here is that bereavement is a psychological distress, but it does have physiological outcomes as well. Clients may have poor sleep, they may have poor eating habits, some clients may turn to alcohol or recreational drugs, some clients will contact their GP feeling that they have depression and seek some form of medication to help them manage their moods. It is usually around this point that the client will seek counselling, and this is the path that the client must walk with the counsellor. So from here we have to look at managing and helping the client manage these emotions and manage the disorganisation. Clients will often feel, I'm losing it, I just can't get my act together. And what happens is they may have started to get their act together at this stage, and then these emotions that they have nicely feed back into the disorganisation and they can't pull themselves out. And so the counsellor's job is to help them move through these emotions, these initial emotions, through disorganisation, back through an understanding of the shock and the experience, and then move on in a different life pattern, which will not be this one, but will be in a different way. Now, part of that process for the counsellor and the client is to look at life prior to the shock, to recognise the joy, the experiences prior to the shock, and to validate that as well as the loss. Quite often when clients have been bereaved, they focus on the loss, the last few days in hospital, the last few days of the marriage, the last few days, and don't look at the whole experience. And by making the whole experience a complete story, it helps the client understand what's going on. It is worth noting that some clients who have relatives and friends who have long-term health issues may feel that they're actually prepared for the loss. This, in my experience, is not the case, and the loss is never at the right time. You know, they're surprised today, they didn't see them yesterday or whatever, and so the shock on these experiences are exactly the same. And in fact, those clients may find that the bereavement is harder to manage because they feel they had already dealt with it. So these emotions and the disorganisation impacts on them in a very different way to somebody who has a sudden shock. Okay, so then we would be looking at these ways of moving forward. Now, this whole grief cycle is a very personal thing for the client. I've explained it in a theoretical manner, but when I would be talking to a client, I would be putting in very personal things that the client wanted to share about their life prior to the shock, and also looking at personal ways of moving forward once they have left this disorganisation behind. Often, usually actually, I give the client this piece of paper to take with them. I have found clients have come into my counselling room several weeks later with this piece of paper very carefully folded in their wallet or purse, with so fragile down the folds, where they have looked at it and folded it back up again. And they look at it because it reassures them that these emotions that they are experiencing and the disorganisation and their inability to get on is quite normal. And this is despite quite often family and friends' expectation that they should be getting over it now. There is no time scale to this. Clients may take a very short period of time. It may take many years to recover from a really big shock. So counsellors have to suspend the time when they're dealing with the client. So as I say, at the end of the session, and we may use this diagram when they bring it into the room over several sessions to actually keep reiterating where they are and what's going on. But they find this a comfort, and it is something that I would always give to the client at the end of the session for them to take away, to give them something concrete to hold on to that validates their emotional state at that time.